morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ADBI Special Talk on Women and Girls in Climate Change Intersections. My name is Pichaya Sirivanabut. I'm a deputy head and also the senior economist of the Capacity Building and Training Department at the Asian Development Bank Institute. Before we start these special talks, allow me just to give you a quick rule of the house rule for today. Next slide, please. So if you have any question or any comment, you are able just to put your comment or question in the chat box at the bottom of this of the screen. However, you'll not be able just to turn on your microphone or your camera to talk. So I would appreciate your kind understanding to put your comments and the question in the chat box. Thank you very much. And the disclaimer for the presentation and also for this event, you can also read it from the chat box. We already shared it with you. So with no further ado, allow me just to start this with a special talk on this topic. As we already know, the gender inequality coupled with the climate change crisis is one of the serious challenges in our time. It poses threats to ways of life, livelihoods, health, safety, and security for women and girls around the world. The climate crisis is not gender neutral. Women commonly face higher risks and also greater burdens from the impact of the climate change. For example, in many regions, women bear disproportionate responsibilities of securing food, water, fuel, and home care. Yet, according to the United Nations Environment Program, 80% of people displaced by the climate change are women and girls, which push them in the greater risk of economic, physical, and also psychological violence. Moreover, women's unequal participation in decision-making processes and labor force stimulate inequalities and prevent women from fully contributing to climate-related planning, policy making, and policy action and implementation. Spontaneously, climate change has created risk and also uncertainty about our future. Extreme climate events, including wildfires, flood, storm, and typhoons, have become a terrifying new normal. Continuously increasing temperatures, air pollution, and striking weather changes are leading to immediate life-threatening dangers to children and youth. Young people are not only the victim of the climate change, but also contributor to the climate actions. Recently, we have seen the movement of youth and younger generation across the world to stipulate effective climate change solutions toward achieving sustainable development. According to the survey done by the Lancet, around 70% of people aged 16 to 25 are extremely worried or very worried about the climate crisis. So with these two combined backgrounds, as well as to take the opportunity to celebrate the International Women's Month amid the climate change challenges, our ADBI Special Talk today is welcoming two distinguished female speakers to share their perspective on gender-responsive solution for an effective policy framework that will support women and girls in climate change, adaptation, and mitigations, as well as to take this opportunity to reflect the youth involvement and also contribution to inclusive and sustainable climate action. To officially start this webinar, allow me to invite the Dean and the CEO of the Asian Development Bank Institute, Professor Dr. Tetsushi Sonobe, to give the opening remarks. Dean Sonobe has more than 20 years of experience analyzing the roles of human capital, institutions, and management in industrial development in Asia and the other regions. Prior to joining ADBI in April 2020, he served as the Vice President of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Study, or the GRIPS, in Tokyo for 6 years. With no further ado, Dean Sonobe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. My video is coming. Okay. So, distinguished speakers and participants, good afternoon from Tokyo, and welcome to the ADBI Special Talk on Women and Girls in Climate Change Intersections. In commemoration of International Women's Day and Women's History Month, we celebrate the achievements of women throughout history who fought courageously for equity, justice, and opportunity. This month also reminds us about the progress and all the hard work done on the continuous journey to promote gender equality around the world. I would like to invite you all to celebrate women's achievements and honor their amazing strengths and dedication. As you know, however, women are disproportionately excluded from decision-making processes regarding climate change mitigation and adaptation, and underrepresented in leadership roles in global climate actions. ADBI is promoting gender equality and empowering women in all policy areas, including climate change issues. We promote gender responsive policies by supporting women's participation in climate change decision-making and providing platforms to amplify their voices to be heard and sharing their incredible works, aspirations, and impacts that they are being done across sectors. Likewise, the youth have been disproportionately excluded from decision-making processes and underrepresented in leadership roles in climate change policy making. But they are now making increasingly important contributions to global climate actions. Having said that, we must admit that much work is needed to be done. International, national, and local level capabilities and their cooperation are required to advance gender equality, equality across generations, and climate resilience. On today's special talk, we are honored to welcome two female distinguished speakers, Athena from UN Women and Aminta from UN Youth for Climate 2021 and 2022. They will share their insights and experiences that will help us deepen our understanding of the interconnection between women and youth on one hand and global climate change on the other hand. Distinguished speakers and participants, I hope that today's discussion will inspire and motivate all of us to work together toward a more sustainable future where the voices of women and the young people are heard, valued, and empowered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Sonobe, for your opening remark. So now I would like just to start our discussion on this topic of women and girls in the climate change intersection. So allow me just introduce our first speaker, Athena Dennis Gallo. She's the program analyst of the Gender and Climate Change UN Women. So Athena is a development practitioner with over a decade of experience working in humanitarian actions, disaster risk reduction, and also the climate change adaptation. Her work focuses on strengthening capacity on gender-responsive climate action through providing technical support to the government and stakeholders, co-creating tools and guidance, and facilitating knowledge production processes. Our second speaker is the young female climate change activist from Thailand, Aminta Prempoon-Viwat. So Aminta is the senior year student at the Patuman Demonstration School in Bangkok, Thailand, and she represented Thailand at the Youth at the UN Youth for Climate event in 2021 and 2022. She also the founder of the Youth Mentorship Project, a youth organization dedicated to teaching students from vulnerable groups in Thailand with the value of sustainability and the resilience through STEAM project. So she also the part of the SDG Youth Panel on UN in Thailand and the youth advisor to the Special Rapporteur on the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. So let me just start with Athena first. Although we have been talking about the bias impact of the climate change on women and girls, and it seems that people are still not entirely clear about what that means. And so in your experience, like also from your perspective, can you just help us to understand better how gender inequality and climate change are interconnected?
Thank you, Pichaya, and thank you for the opportunity to also speak with everyone and to maybe have some sharing also towards the end of this talk. I'm really keen to also learning from our participants on their experiences on gender and integration of gender and climate change. I know you have so much also. Maybe you can share the slide quickly. I mean, guys, this is not a very long slide. We only have an hour to look into the linkages and also look into opportunities as well. So let me just start by saying that, I mean, most of you who works in the climate space, you would know that at least because I work at the Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific, so my focus has always been looking at the region. And if you look at the climate risk index, it's quite outdated because the last report was launched in 2021, but it's still, I think, nothing has changed so much. So at least 6 out of the 10 countries, 6 out of the 10 most climate affected countries are from our region, from the Asia and the Pacific. The data is a 2-year, the data they collected was based on aggregated data from 2000 to 2019, but the information is based on a couple of data points like number of deaths for 100,000 inhabitants, number of losses in terms of purchasing power and losses per GDP. So while it paints a very grim picture, as the IPCC report also paints a very grim picture, what this map does not show us how it has differentially affected the different segments of society. So for some of you, you might have also seen that the last synthesis report, the last report of IPCC has been launched as well. And I guess it also just resonates the earlier message that they have put there, that transformations really has to be made in the way we look at climate change actions and the needed actions needed to really look into transforming inequalities. So just to start again, Chaya gave a very good summary earlier on how disproportionately women and girls are impacted. Just to say that again, climate change or crises do not affect everyone equally, as Prichaya said. Gender and other aspects of social identities related to age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, these things that you see here are drivers of inequality and definitely interacts with how we look at capacities and vulnerabilities to climate change and crisis. So some examples could be, we know that during crisis, at least 70% of women experience gender-based violence. We also know that women's livelihoods, because it's usually precarious, usually informal, so they're usually the ones that are mostly displaced, economically displaced. We also know that in a lot of countries, I'm Filipino, and even in my country, a number of the most marginalized women do not possess like identity cards. So even in humanitarian responses, they do not get the services or aid that they need because of that. Of course, if you're looking at healthcare, that's also the same because we have physiological needs. And sometimes during crisis, it's very difficult. There are interruptions in services and then, for instance, maternal health care or SRH, our sexual reproductive health and rights, are not easily accessible during those times. In general, I would say that the linkages, compared to 5 years ago, the linkages now are generally being clear. There are more data coming out, more disaggregated data coming out of the linkages between gender and climate. And there is actually more recognition by different member states or parties to integrate it in their work. Can you move to the next slide? For a very long time, the discourse of women in climate has been focused on the impacts and how the victimization discourse, as we say. But of course, we also, I'm sorry, next slide, please. But we also say that women have always been at the forefront of climate justice. We have always been working with communities to look at innovative solutions for climate adaptation, looking at seed banking, for instance, in agricultural sectors, leading that work, also convening local communities to look at other potential solutions based on indigenous knowledge. But at the same time, we're also occupying spaces at negotiations to really push the discourse of gender and push the discourse of climate and integrate really the language of transformation in those negotiations. So I see like there's two things. We're vulnerable, sure, but at the same time, we have been leading work. So we have to look at both in the way we maybe move forward and address these issues together. And I see that the nexus have the discussions of the nexus have always been like growing stronger and stronger throughout the years. So I'm not sure if that makes sense. And then it's interestingly, by the way, just before this call, actually, I saw that the UN has also adopted a resolution talking about asking ICJ, the International Court of Justice, to look into what do you call this, climate, I forgot, but it's on climate justice to make sure that the issues of human rights are now taken into consideration. So there's really like the space is really expanding now for more discussions on justice. And again, climate justice cannot exist without gender justice. So over to you, Pichaya. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Athena. I think it's very interesting. It's this kind enlightening for me just to hear. We know there's challenges out there, but still we also have a good news in terms of expanding space of talking and discussing and maybe moving forward for the more concrete action in this area, right? So I want to discuss more about what have been done, what initiative, but I come back to you on the next round. Right now, I want to move to Amita because we see in the past couple of years, we see a lot of movement of the younger generation about the climate change impact. Because we all know, like I mentioned earlier, these climate change impact is bring a lot of uncertainty in the future. So for your perspective, Amita, and I know that you quite an activist, young activist in Thailand, how does climate change affect youth and younger generation? And also, how have you, we have learned about the initiative, this so-called Youth for Climate. So can you just share more about the detail of the program and what the main purpose and the role of this program?
Okay, so thank you so much for those two questions. I guess I'll start first by talking about like the impact of climate change on younger generations, specifically youth like me. So I think that the first thing that we have to make clear is that when we're talking about climate change, the things that we're saying aren't just like global warming, but rather that us youth, we're inheriting a more unpredictable climate, and it's going to be much more extreme than what we're seeing now. And that means that whatever is happening right now is just going to keep escalating, and the effects are just going to become larger. And we can see that all around the world, especially during this past year. Personally, from my experience, I've had the opportunity to be a volunteer teacher in many areas across Thailand, whether it be up in the north or down in the south. And what I really see is that there are so much more complex effects and complex impacts that we see to the younger generation besides what we just read or learn about through research on the internet. So I guess I really just want to start by sharing a few things then. So the first thing that I can see that is very prevalent through the effects is the effects to our health. Of course, the environment is intertwined with our healthcare system and also how our immune response and everything like that. Human health really has an impact. And for example, when I go to northern Thailand, I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with the fact that Thailand has a problem with PM 2.5, with a lot of the pollution here. And when I talk to the children there, many of them always tell me that they're always coughing or they're always going to the hospital. And many people in their family actually have a lot of lung cancer or other sorts of lung diseases that can really be seen from the fact that they have lived with this pollution for such a long time in their lives. And that's really heartbreaking for me to see that these people, they have to be affected by that every single day. And even though clean air is a basic human right, it's still being infringed upon and our health is still being overlooked. And we're not even talking about other effects such as like contaminated water that also leads to other diseases through the rivers and streams that these people use that also lead to other health effects. But other than health, another issue that is also very near and dear is also the economic impacts, of course, because when I go to these rural areas in Thailand, when I go to teach, most of the families rely on agriculture as a means to earn money, as a way to put food on the table, basically. And when they're affected by climate disasters, whether it be droughts or also like floods, like it ranges, all of these things, it affects them and also their economic stability. This means that usually not only does it cause like losses for their money and their profit that's running in their family, but also oftentimes it leads to another impact, which is education. Children are often pulled out of school when their family experiences economic losses. When there's instability, it's much more often for young girls in particular to be pulled out of school to help provide for their family, whether it to be to work in their farms or to work in their family's business, because that's the only way that they can sustain themselves. So immediately you can already see like the impacts on the health, on economics, and also on education. And all of these three things basically have a much greater impact into the future, because it's going to be a long-term effect that once these children grow up, they will also have to deal with this. And if they don't have the education, if they don't have good health, then their lives in the future will be affected, whether it be not being climate resilient, not being ready to respond to disasters in the future, or also being less responsive to everything that's going around. So this really shows that all of the impacts are basically interconnected. Like when you talk about climate change, it's not just about the environment, but it's also about other human rights, access to water, access to education, and also these socioeconomic things that are so expansive in our society. And we really have to be aware of that. The fact that when the effects aren't just one dimension, like they are a lot of different things together. And that is why it's so essential. And that is why I think so many youth are raising up their voices, why we're being so much more active, because it's such a significant and urgent challenge for us. And we feel like we need to address it now, because otherwise it's our future that's at stake. But with that in mind, I do feel like youth have the power to do so. Like we can use our voice, like I'm doing right now, to come up with like innovative solutions and stories and really collaborate in this like borderless world. But so that brings me pretty nicely onto the second question that you asked me about the Youth for Climate and what that initiative actually is. So the Youth for Climate is actually headed by UNDP and also the Italian Ministry of Ecological Transition. So the purpose of this is actually to amplify the work of young climate leaders all around the world and to empower youth to drive change and also climate action in our own respective societies. So this started in 2021. And I'll just share my screen to show what the main key purposes and also the main points that the Youth for Climate actually talked about. So in 2021, over 400 youth were selected from around 200 countries to go to Milan, Italy. And we came to this event called Youth for Climate Driving Ambition. And at the event, we had the opportunity to come up with a document, a policy document with the 4 themes that you can see here on the screen right now: youth driving ambition, sustainable recovery, non-state actors engagement, and a climate conscious society. So basically, with all of our backgrounds, 400 youth from all of these countries around the world, we gave policy recommendations and proposals related to climate change, related to how we can really drive climate action regarding the 4 different themes. And then what was so amazing for me was that even though we came from all of these different countries, we had the same goal, the same vision of making our world a better place. And it can really be seen from the policy document, from the Youth for Climate Manifesto, as it's called, because this manifesto was actually sent to COP26. And the recommendations that we gave, whether it be to include more young women, to fund people to actually be able to go to COP26, or to have like a climate finance network in a way that you can fund these programs, it really came out in the COP26, the things that the world leaders talked about. And it was also relevant for other UNFCCC processes as well. So this document really showcases the power of young people and how young people can be involved in policy. So this is something that I really want to share. So on the next slide right here, you can see the Youth for Climate Manifesto. And if you're interested, please feel free to scan the QR code to read more on the 4 different themes, the 4 thematic areas that young people talked about at the Youth for Climate in 2021. But with that being said, this was only in 2021. But then with the Youth for Climate initiative, like we really wanted to make it sustainable. We didn't just want to go to a conference, make a manifesto, and then submit it to world leaders. Instead, we also wanted to keep it going, to keep it and actually make it truly sustainable. And that's why later on in 2022, the UN and also the Italian government, they organized Youth for Climate Powering Ambition in New York City. So we were able to meet again. It was like 130 leaders from the 400 that was selected the year before. And then we were able to come together to share the successes and lessons learned from the 2021 summit. And that really showed that youth delegates that I met from the year before, we were able to come together and really share our stories of once we came back to our country, how we developed and how we took the lessons that we learned and scaled up our passions and scaled up our actions in the way that we will continue our work in the way that we can, and also try to make it truly sustainable. So I just want to wrap up by saying, but I think that the Youth for Climate initiative is just one example of how youth are driving change, but there are so many other ways that youth can be involved. And I feel like I'll be talking about that more later on. So back to you, Ms. Pichia.
Thanks so much, Amita. Like you give a really clear picture in a very, short time about this impact on the youth and also younger generation, and also like I know about the Youth for Climate before, but I never used so much in detail about what you guys actually doing. So like for some people, it sounds like, oh, they're just young people gathering and doing something that like a fun things, but actually is something that worthwhile and more valuable when it comes to climate action, which I will ask you on the next round of the question, just to share with us more. So back to Athena. So because we hear about the Youth for Climate program, I want to ask you just to share more about the initiative or the policy measure that been implemented or about just to be implemented, not only by the UN agency, but also probably with it from the other international organization or government around the world. Can you share a little bit more on that sort of initiative?
Sure. I learned so much from Amita as well, though. Like I was like scanning that code from my side.
I was about to do the same, actually.
Thank you so much, Amita. I really appreciate it. That's so powerful. So let me just begin that. I was really off track there. But then let me start first with what UN Women is doing together with its partners, and maybe we can delve into what other organizations are also doing, or the partnerships that we've been able to broker to advance gender and climate work. So some of the key aspects. So basically, I'm I'm the project officer for one of the flagship programs in the region. It's called Empower, Women for Climate Resilient Society. So Empower is basically a joint program between UNEP and UN Women. So we're like merging our powers and mandates together to leverage this work on climate and gender. So the key strategies that we've been using so far is the 5 things that you see in this slide. So we've been working a lot with CSOs. So our target countries initially, so we're in our second phase. The first phase started in 2018, and now we're embarking on the second phase. But I guess these 5 things are still the 5 key areas that we continue to work on. So the first area is working with CSOs at the country level, at the regional level as well, to really amplify their voice and leadership. For those that work on gender as well, you would know that a lot of the women's organizations are quite in silo with those CSOs that work on the environment. So one of the key areas of work that we've done so far is really building a network, a close-knit network at the country level to merge those 2 areas together and really see how one work actually amplifies the other. So we've been building networks there, making sure that we create platforms for them to participate, for instance, in NDC processes, making sure that there are high level political dialogues in country to influence, for instance, delegations contributions to COP, for instance. So this is one area of work that we have been doing. We've also been doing a lot of work on gender environment data. Of course, no policy action could be possible, like unless it's counted, it usually does not matter. So at least for some people. But what we've been trying to advocate, and UN Women is, I think, well positioned to do this. We have a very strong gender statistics team that is looking at gender environment data. So at least for Empower, we've been working with the national statistics offices in different countries to really create demand for the collection and use of gender and environment data. So it's a collaboration between national statistics offices, but also data users like the Ministry of Women's Affairs, the Ministry of Environment. That's at the country level, but at the global level, we've also developed model questionnaires on gender environment data to really facilitate the production of data to inform decision making. A couple of other work is making sure that we work on different climate related policies, not just NDCs and NAPs. NDCs definitely, but also NAPs or climate change gender action plans, or if there are sectoral policies as well, for instance, on renewable energy, we also work on those policies to make sure that we inform it, but also making sure that the CSO voices are also included in those processes. One key fun thing that we also do, I would say, is on resilient livelihoods. UNEP is quite a strong partner here because they bring in the technology aspect. So we've managed to unlock climate financing or financing for women entrepreneurs for them to use renewable energy in their livelihood. So this is basically, at least there were 39 interventions in the last year, and mostly people have been using renewable energy for agriculture. So it's usually to pump water, to have we tried to also use it for goat racing. So we've been trying to look at different ways on how to use RE, but there's 2 components. So accessing financing, and then also skills development for women and entrepreneurs to be more knowledgeable in RE and to access those financing. And the last aspect is on regional learning. So we work this, I guess, is the part that how we work with different partners as well. So we work closely with ASEAN, with different knowledge institutions like the Stockholm Environment Institute to really produce a lot of data, a lot of tools, a lot of guidance. With UNITAR, for instance, we also produce a lot of an e-learning course. With BRAC University, 2 other e-learning courses. So there's so much knowledge production that has been done, but also working with sub-regional agencies like ASEAN and ISIMO to make sure that those knowledge and those policy analysis and recommendations really translate into concrete actions in the regions. So regional learning is one key aspect. Some of these things, so now we're embarking on the second phase of the work. You can scan the QR code. That's also the brief for the second phase. So what we want to do is really scale up that lessons and really support member states in the region to really translate the commitments, because so much commitments has been made. At least 75% of the last round of NDCs refer to gender now. 39% has like some concrete actions related to gender and climate. So there are commitments being made. Countries are actually advancing, at least countries from this region are really advancing more work on it. But we really have to still look at how it translates to concrete actions and changes in the lives of women and girls on the ground. So that's how we're looking at the second phase of also our program, to make sure that it happens immediately, because as Amita was saying, it's really urgent. And just to say also that the COVID pandemic has also, pushed really poverty, like pushed people to the margins. One data set that we just collected as well is that it will take at least 5 years for us to meet pre-pandemic levels of poverty. And we all know that women were really pushed to the margins during that time. So imagine like, we know that in the next few years, or it's happening now, I'm Filipino, so every year there is a crisis that compounds and compounds. So how long do we actually get out of this trap? So yeah, but more concerted efforts to support each other, I guess. Our governments, our CSOs, our youth, definitely our youth, to move ahead. So over to you, Pichaya.
Thank you, Athena. It's like so many initiative and also policy measures that implemented. But like you said, what the most important thing is just how to really implement it, make it really, achieve the goal that we have. Like you said, COVID-19 has dampened all the progress of this gender equality and also the climate change, the SDG achievement goal that we're planning is actually going backward during that time, and how we have to come up and thinking about this and how to make it at the not only the same level, actually progress to then the pre-pandemic. That's very challenging to all the government officials. So I just want to move to Amita for another time, just to ask you a little bit more, because we hear the initiative from Athena side, from the international organizations. But now, what about the youth major contribution and also to the climate actions? So we know we have the, you're telling us about the activity of the Youth for Climate, but what's the outcome and what is the plan that they are doing right now toward the, climate actions in the future?
Okay, thank you so much for that. I just have to start by saying again that I really enjoyed Ms. Athena's presentation as well. Like, it's so nice to hear that like on an international level organization, there are actions being taken. And I feel like as a youth, that's very hopeful for me to hear. And I would love for it to continue in the future as well. So as for what youth are doing, like what are our contributions, I feel like it comes in many ways, because we have to understand that youth being involved in climate action, it's not just one thing that you can define or one thing that you can say, because in different countries, there are different contexts that you have to be aware of. And I'll talk more about that later on, but it's just something that I want to preface. But okay, so first of all, I think that the first thing that youth are involved in, and a lot of people are aware of it, is advocacy and activism. Like, it's very clear that a lot more youth are using their voice to speak out about these issues, and even to protest or to like go on strikes from school or stuff like that. And of course, that's like a very in your face kind of way that youth are coming out and like using their voice in a very brave way. But then at the same time, I feel like this also raises issues for youth for ourselves, because we also have to ensure the safety and the rights of the youth, so that they feel like they are protected and not violated in any way from any organizations or from any other stakeholders. And I feel that this is an issue that is often overlooked in youth activism and youth advocacy, because people often take advantage of youth. And if there are not child protection agencies or people who overlook them, then it might become a problem in the future. But no matter what, I feel like youth really are dedicated, and we're really using our voice to raise more awareness about this issue. Sorry. Let me just, sorry, there's a, okay, sorry about that. Okay, let me just continue then. Other than that, I feel like another thing that youth are involved in is really coming up with the solutions themselves, because it's one thing for us to be speaking and to be raising awareness about these issues, but what we say to policymakers is that we want action, not words, right? At the same time, youth also have to do that. And that comes in the form of like coming up with new innovations and solutions, whether it be more sustainable products that youth can use or youth have learned about in their school, or new agricultural techniques that have been taught and that they can develop, whether it be in their school life or in university. That are things that are being integrated into youth's daily lives. And I feel like it's really something that really shows that youth really do have the power, coupled with our technological knowledge and also our way of like going about things in the new world and also dealing with all of these new changes. I feel like youth really can be, I would say, entrepreneurs in that sense of coming up with new solutions. And then the last thing that I would say is political engagement. Like youth are being more involved in political processes to really demand more climate action. For example, in the UN, there's the UN Secretary General Advisory Board on Climate Action, or here in Thailand, as I'm also involved in, is the SDGs Youth Panel. But then other than that, like youth can also come up with their own organizations or their own initiatives, such as Youth Mentorship Project, which is what I'm showing here on the screen right now. It's my own initiative to raise more awareness, to give people in rural areas like education about climate resilience and sustainable development. And that's just one example of how youth can be involved and how to really bridge the gap between youth who are able to speak out, youth who can be engaged in climate action, versus those who are less fortunate, those who do have something to say but might not have the means to do that. So that is also something that is very important. Like, of course, there's many issues, many layers to youth climate action involvement, and I feel like it would be hard to summarize here, but it really is a lot. But the key message I would say that I really want to emphasize, and what is really the main thing that would lead towards success for youth being involved, is that we need collaboration. We need collaboration from other youth-led organizations, from other NGOs, from other agencies, whether it be the government, other institutions, or different stakeholders that will help us to give us the resources, the knowledge, the know-how, and also the opportunities to be able to collaborate and co-design all of these new solutions that we have and that we're thinking about. Because oftentimes like youth want to do something, but you just can't, because whether it be like financial issues or other support issues, I feel like youth really can be key players for climate action. But if we do have the opportunity to implement these best practices, then we can really push the boundaries for innovation. So I just want to end by saying that I feel like we really need to shift the power structure in society, basically, so that we can become more inclusive, have youth be at the table, but not just to give their opinions, but also to be there for every step of the solution, to come up with the solutions themselves, to implement it, and also later on to follow up on that and make sure that we don't create this cycle where people who contribute the least to the problem are being affected the most. And we have to recognize that at the end of the day, if youth are still being overlooked in our daily lives, then in a crisis will never ever be thought of. So that's all I have to say for that question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amita. Very interesting and inspiring indeed for your message, because like for me, empowering vulnerable group is something that very important, and bring in inclusiveness and equality, and also just to equalize the impact, or just, even reduce the impact to them. So I have roughly about 15 minutes left for this webinar, and I think we get some questions from the floor right now that I would like just to direct to each of you. Some of them are comments, so I would just probably just to skip that. Hope you guys don't mind. But one question I think is mostly look like it's going to Adina. It's just, how can women economic empowerment bring positive impact on addressing climate change issues, especially in countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India? And this question is from Shahzad Hasraf. So Adina, you want to take that one?
Hi, thank you for that question, though. I think from the top of my head, though, there are three things. Maybe I couldn't put it into context because I work mostly on Southeast Asia, as you probably would know, but I would think that the same strategies on women's economic empowerment is the same strategies that could also be maybe contextualized in India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Okay, Afghanistan has a different context, but three things that comes to mind. I mean, women's economic empowerment can have really positive impacts in really promoting sustainable agriculture. That's the first one. Women's economic empowerment can support like sustainable practices that can help mitigate the impacts of climate change. For instance, women farmers can use economic power to adopt more climate resilient agriculture practices, such as crop diversification, for instance, organic farming, also water efficient irrigation. The second one is that because we're working so much on renewable energy as well, we've seen that women's economic empowerment can really facilitate the use of clean energy. We've seen that they have strong capacity to really adopt the use of clean technologies, but also teach their communities how to use and really maximize those. The third area I would say is that women's economic empowerment is a way for us to really strengthen women's resilience to climate impacts, including disasters. So if they have economic empowerment, they have more bargaining power in their families, in their communities. They can have more access to resources, for instance, early warning systems. They can have more access to credit and financing to put in more to put insurance into their crops, for instance. So I would just say that women's economic empowerment cuts across well-being, health, economic areas. So it links to different spaces of women's well-being and rights. So it will have positive impacts to addressing climate change, both at the adaptation side, but also mitigation, I would say. So over to you, Pichai. I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to have more discussions on women's economic empowerment separately.
Right. Because I also interest and want to learn more about women economic empowerment, because we did one event with UN Women last year, but this year we want to focus more about the climate change, the impact on the woman and girl. So we'll move to the next question. I think this one for Aminta. So it's from Maria Romaret. So aside from the activism and also advocacy on climate change issues, do you think that youth are more interested to be directly involved in solving climate change issues, just as going into STEM fields to become climate scientists, engineers, and other related fields, or working in the government or institutions themselves to solve these issues? Do you yourself see youth around you are willing or planning to get directly involved in solving climate change issues? So Aminta, over to you.
Right. I think that youth definitely are interested, and I can say that for myself and also for my friends and also the other youth that I work with. So I would say that mostly they are interested in like STEM fields because that has more opportunities, I would say, if you at least it's more tangible for them, that they, once they go into these fields, they will able to come up with like technological solutions or things that will actually address like the climate change problem. I personally know youth who are already involved with some of these things, innovations such as like filtering water and things like that, in a way that is sustainable and accessible to much more people. And at the same time, there are also some of my other friends who are interested in becoming lawyers, who really want to drive on climate justice, as Mrs. Tina was saying, because that really is an issue that a lot of people are interested in, and it is basically a very important and crucial part of the climate movement as a whole. However, there is still like a disparity that I want to highlight here on people who want to go into the climate field and people who don't, because most of the time there's this perception that when you work for climate action or stuff like that, you won't really have opportunities, or you won't really have like the financial stability or the means to be able to live your life. And also, secondly, people don't really know what you're actually going to do when you study like environmental science or things like that. So there's still this gap between people who are aware of the opportunities that are actually there and people who don't know. Like, for example, a lot of my friends who are already involved, or the examples that I've given you, there are youth who are in Bangkok or youth who are already involved in the climate movement. However, when I go to teach in rural areas, a lot of these youth, they also have an interest for climate action, but they don't see that as a potential career path in the future because they just don't have information on that yet. And that's just something that in society, I feel like we really have to give more attention to the fact that climate change and sustainable development is something that we have to promote and something that we can tell our youth about, and actually tell them that it's a career path or something that's possible for them to pursue, instead of just being like advocacy. Otherwise, people will always just think that youth are just going to come and speak and then that's all they can do. So it's just something that we have to really change at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Amita. Very interesting point on the last part that you just highlight. So the next question is from Naval Kovar. I think this one also for Atina. So in your slide, you mentioned that 6 of the 10 most climate affected countries are in the APEC region. Another statistic is that out of the 20 countries considered the most vulnerable to the impact of the climate change and also less able or ready to adapt by the NDI index, 13 are also affected by the armed conflict. So in this conflict context, women bear the double burden of the conflict and climate change. How does this aspect feature in the mitigation effort to the agency like UN?
Thank you so much for that brilliant question, actually. I think the nexus between climate and security is a growing field now in the discussions on climate, and the focus on human security when we discuss climate is a burgeoning field, I would say. As gender people, we know that it's basically human rights that we talk about. I can say that because it's quite new, even for UN Women, we're still starting. We actually have a climate security specialist now looking at the intersection. Before, we used to, traditionally, as we are climate, we work within the policies, for instance, with NDCs and NAPs, but now we're looking also into action plans on WPS as also an entry point to working on the climate space, to put the linkages together between women's peace and security and climate. UN Security Council has really adopted a number of resolutions that recognize the importance of participation and leadership in conflict prevention and peace building efforts, including Resolution 1325, for instance. And then, for instance, CSW 66 last year has also emphasized that interconnection. So there is still a burgeoning, it's a new field of work, linking WPS, but it is there. Some organizations have been advancing quite significantly on that work. I'm happy to also share maybe my email address if there are follow-up questions on how to maybe collaborate on this work as well. But yeah, but I in the top of my head, I have, those are.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Atina. I think if there's any question further after we finish this webinar, I would encourage everyone just to send an email to the organizer and we can just forward to the speaker later on. We're running out of time, so I get one more question because I think this question would go to both of you. So this from Kantita Chowpotong. So it's the question that would the actions or step we take today be sufficient to avert the effect of climate change, since women and girls' obstacle to access education is still there in society? So Amita, you want to be the first one who answered this question, and then Atina would be the second one.
Sure. I think the first thing that I have to say is that I feel like nothing is ever going to be sufficient enough because everything needs something more. Like there's no end to development or no end to sustainable development as a whole. I feel like everything can be improved and it can carry on and continue to be even better. So I think that no matter what we do, there's still something more that we can keep doing, certain policies or certain actions that can be taken more aggressively to really push the agenda forward. But in terms of specifically for climate change, for women and girls, and for education, I really do believe that that's why education is so important, why we have to lessen the gap between educational inequality, for accessing quality education for women and girls specifically, because as a youth, I really do see that education is the foundation for everything later on. Like if women and girls have the ability and have the knowledge to deal with climate change, to deal with all of the issues, natural disasters, and also how to take care of basic things like our menstrual hygiene or things like that are also impacted by climate change, I feel like that is going to be so much more important. And that is one of the first things basically that we have to do before we really achieve like gender equality or good climate action. Like I really support the fact that we have to drive for education first, but then it won't be sufficient, like as I've said before, because you need to keep on doing it. Like there's no end to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on that part. I think it's a continuous process that we have to keep doing for sustainable development. So Atina, any perspective or any thought from your side for this question?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Aminta and you. I mean, yes, groupthink here, but it's true. I don't think there is. I mean, we try to stay positive though, right? Like we're doing the best we can. We're trying to accelerate a lot of things to make the changes to meet the 1.5-degree commitment. Although we do keep on moving the target, but I hope that we are trying our best to take the necessary steps. But on the education part, there is really a need to also recognize that the education systems that we have are not perfect as well. And while it does provide a little bit of leeway for some segments of society, it's not accessible to a very big part. So we also have to look at really transforming educational systems to be more equitable and to really provide the necessary knowledge and skills needed for people like Aminta and for the next generation to really cope with, adapt, and drive transformations. For development that is more just. So yeah, that's for my side.
Thank you, Atina. We're running out of time, but I just want to wrap up this webinar with actually my question to both of you. And if you could just spend 30 seconds or 1 minute to answer to this question. Moving forward, what would be your hope, or what would be things that you want to see probably in the next 5 years when it's come to development and the progress of the climate change in the concept of interconnection to the women and girls and youth? So Amita, you want to be the first one?
Sure. I have 2 words, inclusivity and accountability. So the first one, inclusivity, is of course we need to have women and girls at the table. We need to have them in making those decisions as well in positions of leadership. So that's why I feel like without that, you wouldn't be able to really take down all of the institutionalized inequality or the way that society has already been structured. So that's why I feel like we need to be inclusive inclusive from the very start. And secondly, we need to be accountable, because without accountability, people can just say things and then it obviously won't carry on. It won't be sustainable and it won't translate to real action. So that's my 2 keywords for today. What was it? Inclusive and accountable. Yes.
Thanks, Aminta. Atina, what would you like to see in the next 5 years?
I would like us to see maybe breaking silos. It's really have been challenge for people who have been in the development sector for quite some time. We know that a lot of the reasons why we are not able to maximize resources, we're not able to tap the most vulnerable, is because we have always been working on silos. And that's what we want to try to break, at hopefully in the next 5 years, because it's almost 2030, guys. And the second one I would say is hope. As feminists, it's really quite difficult and challenging to work in this space. But I think hope is something that we need to bring together collectively to get us to move forward. So yeah, I mean, it's a Miss Universe question, is it not? So happy Women's Month, guys.
I really like your answer, though, because for me, I believe in women support women, and also the whole society support each other. I 100% agree with both of your points, and unfortunately, we're running out of time, and we have more questions, but we're going to forward this question to the speaker so that they can answer you later through the emails. And before we go, I would like just to ask all other participants take maybe 3 or 4 minutes to take this evaluation of the survey for ADBI with this QR code. And I'd like to thank both Atina Gallo and also Aminta Permkul-Viwat for an excellent, fruitful, and inspiring discussion for today's special talk. And I look forward to welcoming both of you in the next event of the ADBI. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
you.
Pichaya.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.